Yeah, yeah. That's what.
But actually, going off the familial theme here, just wondering, is everybody like, does everybody here know like their whole lineage and on like both sides of the parents? Have you met like as many people as you can? And if you have, what kind of strategies can people use to kind of connect with all those people? Because I mean, that's it. Sometimes it's hard to find them. Sometimes it's easy, but
Right.
yeah, definitely on my dad's side, I haven't explored that as much.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know what your guys' experience are with that.
We've
Man, it
met a.
really. Oh,
Oh, go ahead, bro.
go ahead.
You, I was gonna say the same thing I am, anyways.
Oh, well, maybe a little bit different, but it does help to have the opportunity to go back to Philippines, uh,
Mm,
and go back and see some of your relatives and meet them, because they will tell you, how everyone is related, because they generally still know because they visually have seen or have heard. And so that really helps. Of our cousins who've never had the chance to go back, well, you ask them about if they ever want to go back. Well, no, not really. And so that was never facilitated for them. So when my kids had an opportunity to go back, being a little bit older, my son is 15 now and my daughter is 8, but they went back 2 years ago, and we stayed for a few months, and to have these kind of memories and to know where they're from, to go visit also their mom's side also was really important, because we ended
yeah.
up going and visiting some of that Ifugao side and seeing some of the relatives on that side. That was that was just really important. The fact that they know that that's something that they're connected to. It being third generation in the United States means that you're not going to retain as much as a second generation already. But at least they have a knowledge of what that might be. So if there is a cultural night at their school, they show up in Igorot gear, and
That's awesome.
they have a rough understanding, at least my son does, of like how to play some of the gong beats. He has his own wanus, um, and he knows where he is physically seen where his ancestors are from. So there is that connection. So all of these little like Igorot statues that we have hanging out in the house. I don't know if you have some of those. I have a few
Mm-hmm.
of those. Um, but those will have meaning for him and my daughter. And so when they're older and long gone, that might be something that they will pass on to their family. Now, in Ifugao culture, there's even more stuff that is hidden. So girls have a certain responsibility as being keepers of the culture, and that's
Oh
something
wow.
that I hope that my daughter's mom will groom into her, is being having that responsibility to be a keeper of the culture. And they even get like artifacts that they pass on to the firstborn girls of the generation.
Wow.
And yeah, yeah, there's some serious stuff about that. And what is the other thing that happens is that if you lose that connection to your ancestors, generally, there's a lot of this a lot of folklore that goes into, maybe that's the explanation of why not so good things happen to you. But when you do have a connection to this and you honor that, then you have the acknowledgement that your ancestors in spirit go with you, go forward with you. And so there's things to be said about that. And sometimes the Christian faith, which is the faith that I guess most of us are like are indoctrined with, and uphold dearly. But there's some of that mystery out there that we can't fully explain. But what I see within our culture is that there's definitely this deep connection, to the spirit of our ancestors, and having that connection certainly allows us to maybe uh, see more, achieve more, or just know that there's something else out there. So um, that 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 strengthens you. So
Right. Yeah.
to me, that's the opportunity to go back, if you can. None That's not afforded to everyone, of course. But
Mm,
if you can, and there's someone to help facilitate that, not just going to Boracay, I don't think that
Mm-hmm.
counts. I've had relatives that go, they go to the holiday spots. You can do that anywhere, man. You go to Fiji, and all that. Yeah. But if you're actually going to go back to your ancestral lands, go back and see your relatives. Go back, at least, make conversation. Hey, I'm so and so, and this is my mom, and this is my dad, and this is where we from, and hopefully, what I find is that the people over there in Philippines welcome you back,
Oh yeah.
and they generally welcome you back if they know your family, and they try to do good for you. Now, I know not every family's set up that way, but generally that's what I find, is that everyone gets a lot more joyful, because they will be surprised that you remember them.
Mhm.
You were
Yeah, they'll be
and
happy to know that you're looking.
yeah, and that they feel quite honored when they know that you're remembering them in
Mhm.
that way. And those are even better facilitated with certain aspects of social media. And that's what I found, is that I still have connections with these guys a lot of times through these social media things. So what were you going to say, Mark?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna just write off that, and another thing that folks can do to reconnect is to learn as much as any language in the Philippines as much as possible. Usually, for most folks, they'll be, especially most Igorot folks, if they're not learning Kankanai or their native tongue from either Kalinga, Ifugao, or whatever, or or in Ibaloy or whatever, like you can learn Ilocano, and we've kind of talked about this. You can learn little bits of Ilocano so that you can speak to the relatives, even if it's like speaking like a baby.
Mhm.
I think it's getting, for most second generations and most of the folks born abroad. There's like even for us, there's like a shyness to speak. It's not that folks don't want to speak it. It's just they're embarrassed about how they're speaking because they don't want to butcher the language. But I think for most folks, you I think it's just to get over that and just try to speak what you can, and even if it's just yes and no, you
Mhm.
can learn. You can try to do that, and if you want to try and learn, and you're in the Philippines, the best people to learn from in the beginning is the little kids, because the
Yes.
little kids, they'll speak in they'll speak a little bit slower, and they'll speak in probably uh, they won't speak as fast, and they'll be able to speak it probably at your level,
Yeah.
which is a child's level. So you can learn a lot of the phrases from the kids. And I remember when I was going back in the 80s. I was a kid then too, but in the 90s, I learned a lot just speaking to the kids because they were making fun of me and stuff, of course, right? And it was funny, but you just learn a lot of stuff. Of course, you can also learn a lot of bad words too. Not from the kids, but you can learn the bad words. That's always the easiest ones to remember at first. But I think learning
Yeah,
the language helps. Yeah. If you can remember all the things that your parents said when they
Parents
were
say to
mad at
you.
you.
That's the ones I can repeat the easiest.
Right, exactly. So I think that helps a lot. And you have to think too, when you go back home, if you can go back home, and when you meet your relatives, I think that most of them will be more shy uh
Mhm.
to meet you than you to meet them. So I think it's just, I'm starting to realize and learn over time that it's just best to step forward and show that you're just as normal as anybody else. You're a normal human being, and and you melt that bridge, or you melt that part down, and you'll start to learn more about your family, and it'll be much easier. How about you, Charlene?
I think that I was one of the fortunate ones here, like being born into uh, a family that already was like working on, tracking our lineage,
Mm,
um, and like on my mom's side and my dad's side. Granted, like I know everything about my paternal grandmother. I don't know
mm.
anything about my paternal grandfather. Like I know that Okab was a name that was just kind of picked. So then I asked my dad, like, what was our name supposed to be? He's like, oh, I don't know. I was like, are you sure you don't? But I guess my grandma's called like the Loyan side kind of was the stronger of the Loyan versus or So anyway, so that was, like that interest didn't come up until much later. So it came up a lot with discussing with my cousins. Um, and then other things that I noticed, were my fellow, cousins also, or relatives here in LA, or, in Bebop, LA. And some people, the interest level is all very different depending on the age and everything. So like when people were going
Yeah.
back home, they were going at an age where they were not ready to, appreciate what they were around. And so now being, we're all starting our own families, it's kind of like, oh wait, I don't even know much. Like even KG doesn't know very much about his heritage, just because maybe their families like didn't really talk about it. So the only advice that I could think of is like Facebook. Like it's
Yeah.
like a lot of people. And I mean, I'm, because KG doesn't really use Facebook, so I'm the one connected to all of his relatives. It's like, oh, here's, look what your cousin's doing. And so sometimes and then for my mom's side too, I know as much about, same thing, my maternal grandmother I know a lot about. I do know enough about my grandfather as well, but there's other like cousins, like other extended family that what is it called? I'm like, I don't know, because his last name's Fugsao. And so I'm like, oh, there's other Fugsaos around, but there's not, but I guess my grandpa had a bunch of sisters. So like direct cousins, there's not a lot of direct Fugsaos, but the clan, I don't really even know who's in charge of tracking that. My uncle, I'm luckily my mom's brother is doing a lot of like tracking, but it's just on him. So it's kind of, it's kind of a lot to that. But again, like I think that if you have some sort of interest, sometimes I'm just bored and I'm like, oh, I'm going to find somebody out there with the last name Okab or Fagsao or somebody else that may or may not, do we have common friends? Do we have common, who are you? And so if when that interest, I think, sparks, it's that, that's like your first almost, type of thing. I think it's something that ancestry.com would do for you, that you would have to, they just find your common, I think they just find common last names. I'm really, really sure. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I would think, if you can't go back home, because yes, you go back home, you find one person, they'll know exactly who you come from, basically.